the apartment on Lakeshore. I commute daily into the heart of the city, inching my way down the streets and through tunnels like intestines until, sweating, I arrive in my office, a piece of shit in the Golden. It is only after 9 grueling hours of paperwork as somebody's office bitch that I am lucky enough to escape. And then I drive. Most of the time, I just sit in silence and chew on the day. It's always tough and always gritty. Eventually, I start studying the people in the cars around me. I quickly discovered that the assholes I work with turn into dicks when they drive. I spend my day with all manner of genitalia, and somehow, I still end up miraculously unsatisfied. That's why I find it easier to just borrow other people's lives. It's one of the best ways I know to get by. By the time I'm on the road, it is dark enough outside that a normal window becomes like mirrored glass, a one-way barrier, but less incriminating. The insides of houses, lofts, and apartments are brilliantly illuminated, vibrant tableaus framed by the windows and presented for me to enjoy as I lurch along. It's like window shopping for moments. My favorite is an apartment on Lakeshore next to the ramp, right at the neck of the bottle that is the Gardiner Expressway, a bleak landmark when I consider where it places me on my drive home. It is high up, seen only from the highway, beautifully full of clutter and the joyful mess of living. It is an artist's loft, and it changed my life. It was 6:48 p.m. on January 3rd of last year, around about the time the city began to shake off the millennium glitter. It was freezing cold despite the heat cranked in my shuddering car, and I was sucking on my cigarette like it could warm me from within. It was my 35th birthday, and I was oozing through the steady crush of evening traffic, heading home to implode on my futon. The certainty of the apartment by the road comforted me, and I glanced over the dash with my usual head tilt. The walls in the room furthest to the right were unnaturally bare. It was the first time I had seen them wanting for chaos, and I was jarred by how stark they appeared. It was also the first time that I had ever seen anyone in the apartment. She was shocking in her nakedness. She moved like a wave, slowly, with languorous rhythm that moved the momentum of her rolling body. Her belly hung, mimicking the swaying orbs of her breasts as they gently brushed the open air. The night was a sleepy one, and I drove past slowly, straining my eyes to focus on the window, past city lights that burned like the end of my cigarette. I was transfixed, peaceful knowing that she was mine to enjoy. The next time I saw her was through a curtain of gauzy rain, her body draped languidly over a settee. Her skin matched the pearly paint on the walls, and I wondered briefly if she had stood naked in front of the swatches in the store, still and serene with relaxed eyes and tilted head. That's how she looked when I saw her, and I swear she lit up as I passed. The room was a gallery, she the art, and I the only patron. Each night she was different. I imagined that she primed herself for my passing by moisturizing her skin and carefully arranging herself on her perch, one I was accustomed to seeing beneath her overflowing body. Some nights, like the first, she was naked. Others, elegantly garbed or wrapped in a simple quilt. She was always smiling. She was sensual in her presentation of what could be. I hated the nights when I was kept late, fearing I might miss my window of opportunity. But she was always there. On the 4th anniversary of that first night, I stared up at her apartment from the confines of the jam, waiting. She wasn't there. On a rare, quick day, I would have assumed that I had missed her. But tonight, the time to gaze, I was forced to take note of every detail. The deeply painted walls that would have made her pale figure stand out, or the ornate blinking shade that covered the bulb, and her absence. For 2 more nights I saw nothing, and on 3rd, a painted sign placed on the ledge. 7:30 p.m. Tuesday, 54 Church Street. Of course I went. It felt like a date should feel. Terrifying. I took an unfamiliar route into a nicer part of town, where families sat behind their windows, wincing at my muffler's guttural coughs. I was paranoid about dropping ash on my sweater, and took care to hold my cigarette out the window like a kid smoking in his bedroom. She would be sensational, and smudges would not do. I didn't even know I owned anything as nice as this sweater, but closet bowels are mysterious places, and mine came through with the remains of a gentleman. When a city digests you daily, you tend to lose that overachieving sheen. I pull up outside the church and find myself craning my neck to find a decent parking space in the vast lot outside of St. James Cathedral. I'm puzzled. Church is on Sunday, right? Maybe God had to reschedule. The expanse of the parking lot seems endless once I park, and I almost want to run. Almost. I wonder why she chose a church. I wonder what her voice sounds like. Good evening, sir. This way, please. I am ushered up the steps and hope to catch a glimpse of her before I am swept inside. I can smell burned coffee and egg salad, probably with the crust cut off, and everything is carpeted the color of salmon. So, a tidy middle-aged man nudges my arm. How did you know our girl? There's a casket at the end of the aisle, and suddenly I wish I were in it. But I'm not, and she is, and I don't want anyone else to see her there. I look around, trying desperately to remember if smoking is allowed in churches. My frantic eyes land on the canvases that line the wall behind her. She's an artist. Before I can make it to the paintings, the man puts a hand on my arm. It's all right, friend. I understand. I was her 3 o'clock. He motions to his name tag, on which is written only the time. An elderly gentleman sits next to the coffee urn, nursing a donut. His name tag reads 5:15 p.m. On the balding Italian, 7:45. The spindly blonde near the door, cradling her own arms, is sporting 9:30, and the Reverend bent towards her is a little later. They murmur quietly, surveying the stacks of name tags and an assortment of drying markers in a jar on a card table next to them. I brace myself against the table and feel it wince in my weight. No, that's not fair. You can't collapse. I need you. I've never believed in God, so I can't start praying, but I feel stifled by my own insignificant body. I can't do anything except choose a marker, gray, and focus intently on twisting the lid off. My clammy hands slip and I'm forced to use my teeth. And then I write mine, 6:45 p.m. There's something crushingly definitive about this action, like somehow I've buried her by snapping the lid back on. I wander, woolly-headed, to the rows of canvases and stare at them blindly. She has chosen an unlikely subject. The canvases are covered with sprawling images of gridlocked cars, brilliantly resonating in loud turquoises, soft yellows, and a blur of overlapping beige and rust-colored blobs. This isn't what rush hour looks like. Rush hour is gray. She was watching us, too. She was watching me. This thought dawns on me as something catches my eye, a small, insignificant blue smudge at the bottom of the largest canvas. That's my car. Just below it, a reddish brush stroke slips off the edge of the canvas, that station wagon with the leering toddlers. To the immediate left, a suggestive swipe of steely gray, the transport that threatened to run me into the gravel. There is no distinguishable license plate on the blue smudge, or on any of the other countless smudges around it. Nothing to suggest my 1992 Audi is in any way different from the hundreds of others that drive the gardener every day. But it could be. She could have seen me, last week or last month, or even that very first night. I could have been seen.
Don't ask me to make dinner. I lived in a house behind the second sky. It was blue like first, but lesser seen. So deep it ran that heaven touched, and Papa killed anyone who said it was not. He wrote tongues, loved all 5 daughters, though men bought us fish at market, and never asked his name. Only merfolk, thinking our gods were the same. Because you served me up, virginal, like gills could breathe, though they ran fingers down, and could, because I ran away once for love. Learned language, as you should when traveling, but it caved to sight, like those eyes that caved inside me, what you said you loved me. While she dressed for day, and I for night, yes, sight caves to traveling, a pulse dipping, your wife that ballooned and deflated out. Her hair wasn't even beautiful, spotting the crowns of human love. She had feet, remember? And though Papa wrote it was never human, 5 stalks, seaweed thrush, he waxed us clean, the thrust of tongue against my 5 sisters young. And for kings we welded shells to cover breasts. They said it was her absence that made him do it. She taught us songs, yellowed-haired tricks, and though the locals knew, it started quick, and bad is never quick. It is good like moon. She pulls again. Because we were too beautiful, they would say. We made him do it. Those locals knew we were not good without him. So I left water first, where it did not burn, absent salt, that old path I rushed. It was instead strange bright, making hair fire white, where he found me, undoing the lace of fin. He said he'd saw me once before. He'd said he'd protect me evermore. You did what's right, they'll understand. Home should never be that place, never a place. But what is below is not heaven. There is only one blue, and you will never know what's not endless thirst, because your children are playing in the street. 4 spots of earth I have killed, see? Papa raped and shot. You should have asked, because I am queen, see? I do not live without plot. So don't ask me to make dinner. I ran away for ache. I have killed for ache. I do not count death. Thank you.
She sits silently with her wrinkled hands folded over her lap as she's wheeled outside into the park. Feeling the strength of the wind on her back, she wraps the shawl around her shoulders tighter, lifting herself onto the wooden bench. Sometimes she likes to take off her shoes and stretch her toes, staring at the feet that once were the reason for her fame. The heel was still thick and tender to the touch, and the toes overlapped one another. He watched her slim fingers grasp the handle of the chinaware as the candle flickered. On the cold nights, she would light an extra one, as though the fire behind them did not exist and light itself would be enough to keep them warm. Even when he closed his eyes, urging his mind to wander, his ears would perk up to listen to her familiar footsteps. His nose would flare to the perfume he knew all too well. He would open his eyes and find her kneeling across from him, black eyes looking into his blue ones. They did not talk, but rather sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. Sometimes he would ask her to dance for him, and he sat and watched as her tiny feet moved to the beat of the drum. The same fingers grasped the handle of the fan with strength, and he imagined that the breeze against her face felt the same as his breath on her neck. I remember the first time I slept through the night without a terrible dream. It was the night that he had shown up. I suppose he'd surprised me from the very beginning. His eyes were like water. The stillness in them could easily be mistaken for the hardness of ice. He introduced himself to Chio-san as Keswick, and he wore the muddy green uniform of the troops that had marched for me and my country months ago. For what incomprehensible reason did he still wear his tattered uniform? If he hoped to get the services of any of my sisters here, he would not have worn the uniform of the offender. We are only 60 miles north of the larger explosion, and I remember we were close enough for me to see its deceptively soft shape in the sky. Chio-san had looked at me expectantly then, knowing I was the only one who she would not have to threaten to service him. But I was bitter. Even after 2 years, Chio-san and my sister saw me as different from them. They felt no empathy for the way their men had seized me from my country and brought me here to service them. I walked to the room that he had been given, and I slid open the screen door abruptly. He looked up at me then. But in his eyes I saw no contempt, no mockery, and I felt the heat in my veins smolder before he ignited it again. I don't remember the rest of the night, except for the way his thumb drew a circle on my shoulder as he began to slide off my kimono. She smiles now as she remembers the day after the war had ended. She remembers how her first impulse was to throw off her kimono and change back into her collared dress, and how she could buy a plane ticket right back to Shanghai. But she never brought herself to do it. She watches a petal fall from the tree above her, and the cherry blossom lands, forcing a ripple in the pond. She's waited all day for a fish or a turtle to look up from under the water. She's been looking for a disturbance from beneath, but the waters have remained calm all day. He knew he was asking to be shot, or at least to be brutally beaten. He pretended not to notice the resentful gazes that followed him as he walked down the streets, as if he wasn't the prey that was waiting to be devoured. She was the only one who had not treated him with disdain, and he went back night after night. That was how it was for many weeks, perhaps months. But that was before she had disappeared. He had lost track of time since he had been released upon the victory of the Allies. He had half expected them to kill him. The scars on his back and arms lay dormant, past and serene, but the pain had been real. His body had become a slave to his weary mind, and his vision began to get hazy from the lack of food. He imagined her walking with him, the curve of her neck and the pale, flawless skin. He had come to smile at the sternness of her face and the curt bow she gave him as a greeting, but he had grown to love the woman he got a glimpse of once the sun had fallen. He had trouble walking in a straight line from the lightheadedness that had begun to take over until he felt a small hand stealing him. He almost didn't recognize her with her hair pulled taut, face powdered heavily with patent rouge lips. He allowed her to take him inside and put him to sleep on the tatami. For the first time since we met months ago, we had a conversation. He was surprised to learn that I was educated and that I could carry a decent conversation with him in his native English. "The war is over," he said. "Why are you still living here?" "I can earn a steady living here as a geisha now," I replied. As if he knew I was lying, he eased himself into a comfortable position as if preparing for the truth. "I can't go back. I'm practically Japanese now." "They won't have me either." He thumbed the ghost scar that trailed up his forearm. "They see me like this, and they'll treat the ones in the internment camps out by the west coast even worse, even after we bomb the shits out of here already." I had the urge to hold him then, and I wrapped my arms around his unmoving body. I traced the scars along his forearms and felt them fan out like riblets onto his back. It must have been the steel rod. They used it once on me when I first arrived, reserved for prisoners of war. He stilled my movement and he grabbed my feet and unbound them. He held the small ankles and frowned when he saw me wince from the pain of moving my feet freely for the first time. In the morning, he would wake and tell me, "My scars didn't ache for the first time last night." And I would reply, "Last night was the first time I slept with my feet freely, unbound." She finishes stretching her toes and puts her socks and shoes back on. She still has the flower petal in her hand as she eases back into the wheelchair and asks to be wheeled towards the base of the tree. She feels the grooves in the bark, reminded of the veins and the scars that pulsed together so long ago. She places the flower on the mound at the base of the tree before asking to be wheeled back again into her home. Thank you.
I'm 14 years old and my father tells me to shoot our dog. Her name's Lucy. She's blind in one eye, and when she walks, she makes this tap, tap sound as she limps around the linoleum floor. My father tells me to do it like it's an afterthought, something on his absent-minded to-do list that he's just remembered to delegate to me. He tells me while we're in the garage, clearing out boxes so my mom has space for some of her art pieces. Not that she sold any yet. My father's pretty pissed that he's been asked to do the cleaning, so he's dragging me in with him. He thinks her sculptures look like little pieces of turd. "Cow turd," he says, pointing at a sculpture with a cigarette. It's clumped with the others to go on display in our garage. I think they're kind of nice. We're going through some old boxes, deciding what we should keep and what we should give to Goodwill. My dad brings it up when we're sifting through an old box full of my mother's videotapes. He tells me, "I think it's about time we got around to shooting that old bitch." He says this as he holds the old yellow videotape in his hand, the catalyst that set him off. It feels like my windpipe has cemented itself closed. All I can feel is a weight in my stomach. "Character building," he says. "This is what turns you from a boy to a man." Then he tosses it into the box, abandons our project, and lugs me inside. He goes into the den, and when he comes out, he's rubbing the gun with his shirt. First, my father chambers the shell, then he takes a cigarette out of his mouth, checks the safety, and shows me how to aim, using my mother in the kitchen as a fake target. Her back is turned to us. She's wearing a pale green dress with a white daisy print. I can hear her hands moving through plates and cups, and the gentle roar of the tap. "Like this," he says. "Then she'll never know it's coming." He steps behind me and places the gun into my hands. He positions my right hand on the stock of the gun and my other hand on the forearm. He wraps my fingers tightly around his body. My arms strain under its weight as my heart bounces into my ear. A sour taste sits on my tongue, a stale and dry feeling that cements itself to the roof of my mouth. My father positions his head level with mine and then places my finger on the trigger. Bang, he says. She's dead. My mother turns on the tap and reaches for the dish rag. She moves it slowly round the outside of the sink, wrings it out, and places it above the faucet. My father grabs me by my sleeve and nudges me into the backyard. When I look back into the house from the back door, he's grabbing his radio and a bottle of beer. I hear the creaking swing of the front door opening and noises of him settling down on the porch. I take a deep breath. I put the shotgun on the ground and crawl on my knees to stick my hand to Lucy's doghouse. She's sleeping, so I slowly push my hand up to her face and massage the top of her head. I'm not sure whether she still likes it. Then again, it's been hard to tell anything with her lately. Last night she threw up something yellow and then ate it back up. Circle of life, my dad said, although I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to call it. Lucy wakes up and lets out a stringy yawn. I move out of the doghouse, pick up the shotgun, and let her stretch out her front legs. I think about doing it there. Lucy pokes her head out and her tongue flops out like a pink, wet carpet. Her drool pools in the grass, and a string of it gets caught in the wind and extends, as if it's hoping to catch on a tree or a limb to make its great Spider-Man escape out of Lucy's mouth. I look at her and pat her head. I decide to let Lucy out the gate, and we walk for a bit down the path that leads into the backwoods. A horsefly lands on Lucy's snout, but she just keeps walking while it feeds. I swallow the lump in my throat down. The way she looks makes me think of a time before she looked so old. I guess it's kind of funny how pets will suddenly look ancient. It never seems like a gradual thing. But then again, maybe that's just me.
Is a dream still a dream if you're awake, lying in bed, your muscles locked up tight in fear of themselves? Is it still a dream if you can open your eyes, though it is difficult for they are made of stone, and you project the insides of your bloody brain out into the room you know? If these are dreams, if they count, then I dream often and in the light of day. It is morning, but I cannot move. The ghosts are back and they have pinned me down. But I must move. Time runs ahead and I can't be left behind. Not today, not on this bright and busy morning. Not when I can hear the birds. I cannot be left behind. I can move again. Why are my eyelids flickering? It's like the light of the entire world disappears, only to leave shuddering back in, weary bulbs petering out before bursting like little solar flares. Maybe I must pin them up, pinching them back and folding back their fabric, threading first the eye of the needle and then the sockets in my skull. But I cannot find my sewing kit. Where have I left it? Where has it gone? It should be there on the table. I dress myself. I begin to make tea. But no, that is not right. I'm still in my bed, and again I cannot move. But I must. The sun demands it. The clock screams. I awake. I move. I breathe again. I dress myself. I begin to make tea. Somehow I'm still in bed. Must I distrust my own eyes? They feel so heavy, and they sing me falsities. The mattress pulsates beneath me, and there is someone here. I can feel the way my jaw is clenched tight, and the way the blanket has left my leg exposed, and the air is cold, and yet still I cannot move. I can feel hands upon me, pressure on the bed, my chest, my skin. I hear my name. There are sounds outside. Please, someone come find me. Please, someone come find me and pull me away. There's a sound louder this time. I'm awake, frightened, but alone. I dress myself. I begin to make tea. I should pull the blankets back over my leg. It's cold, but I can only feel it halfway. I wonder if I'm really there at all. Will I awake again in a few moments after living out an entire day of nothingness? After acting on 1,000 mornings in my mind, how will I recognize my own life? I'm awake again. This time it feels real, though. This time it feels right. I dress myself. I begin to make tea. My eyes remain stubborn, though I will them open. They flutter. There are things in my room that should not be. I only got a glimpse. But I was awake just a moment ago and in the kitchen. The kettle had been singing. I remember. My bed's gravity is greater than the universe, and I'm back in the murderous void. And someone has hung rotting animal heads outside my window, and everything is altered, yet everything is also just the same, and I wish that I could stand it, and I wish I could cry out, and I wish that I could order my sleep-burdened body to move, 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 but I cannot. I am but a conscious corpse. A moment later, I suddenly have strength again, and I try to extricate myself from my great yawning bed, but it is full of apple cores and bones. I cannot get out. I'm slipping in the filth. The wind picks up, and the leering dogs and cats and bats beat at my window pane, their heads bouncing as if ready to burst. But they have no eyes, and their mouths are wide, and they're singing so hideously. No, they're cackling. I wake with a start. The light pours in. It takes a moment, but I can move again. I dress myself. I begin to make tea.
Mysterious things grow in the desert. To thrive in the most barren landscape the world has to offer, a living thing has to have twisted qualities, which border on abnormalities. Kelso Valley stretches over 100 miles of land in the high Sierras, useless for cultivation. The mountain paths are steep, unforgiving, and seem to touch the base of the sun in the summertime. The road is seldom traveled, so hardly visible. If someone crosses the valley, the wind and the sand simply wash their road away, as if to say, no one is meant to walk here. This is the white space of the world God left blank and unforgiving. And it's a place we found my sister, Helen. Throughout my childhood, my parents were government-hired horse catchers. In the summer, during the day, they left my brother Russ and I at an abandoned army base close to the center of Kelso Valley. They rode out to check their traps and left us work to do, but we always played. Russ liked playing trapper with bunny hides our father gave us, but the untreated skin quickly became rancid in the heat. The army base sat halfway up the foothill before the deep span of Kelso Valley and its gradual slope into the opposite mountains. I could see my parents riding towards us from 20 miles away, and used to pretend they were coming to rescue me from a lonely island or a forgotten castle. One evening, as the setting sun was turning the desert sky to violet, I saw my parents riding in. They were riding slower than usual. Dad was usually hungry, so he brought the horses back at a frantic gallop that woke up all the Destiny camp. As they got closer, I saw my mother was holding something in her arms. Doc and Red River were getting antsy in their corral, because they knew it was time to ride home for dinner. I wanted to get home too. Russ had been in a bad mood and we had fought during the day. When my parents were in yelling distance, my father shouted, "Evelyn, come here." I ran to him as fast as I could. My father never gave me a job. When I reached him, my calves ached and my heartbeat shook my chest. My mother moved her horse, Chet, next to me, so I could feel the heat radiating from his sweat-soaked coat. "Take this, Evelyn." She handed me a bundle she was holding, and I received Helen in my 6-year-old arms. My mother dismounted and led her horse to the water trough, and my father yelled at Russ to tack up our horses. I could tell something was terribly wrong. My father stopped shouting to bend behind the aluminum shed to be sick, but I was more concerned about my mother. Her eyes were neutral. I could seldom pinpoint an emotion in her face. It was the way she gripped the side of the water trough that told me something was wrong. Her knuckles were white from the hold she had on the metal lip. I was left alone, standing at the base of camp with a baby in my arms in the darkening expanse of Kelso Valley behind me. I looked down at her dirty body, wrapped up in a salad patch, and her blue eyes looked back at me. I never wanted to let her go. I couldn't bring myself to ask my parents where she had come from, or if she were mine. The ride home to Onyx was slow and confusing. My mother held the thin, nameless Helen in her arms, and my father kept his horse, Duke, at a walk ahead of us. My mother tried multiple times to catch up to my father, but he kicked his horse on, avoiding her. "Dawn," my mother called from her horse, "we need to go to the sheriff." "Shut up," my father replied. "That baby's yours." My mother didn't answer. She held the desert's baby in her arms and tried to think of an excuse for why Helen was hers to name. When we got home, it was late. My brother and I were sent directly to bed after tending to our horses and having something to eat, but I tried to stay awake. My father was yelling, "It's not our business to get into, Marilyn. What about the body? It won't be there in the morning." I could tell by the tone of my father's voice that his mind wasn't going to be changed by my mother, and it was the only argument I remember hoping he would win. She was probably a heat-crazed new mother who walked too close to the sun. I heard him slam a door. My mother was silent. The next Sunday, my mother held the baby named Helen in her arms as we walked into a different church on the opposite shore of the lake. She was greeted with warm smiles and congratulations. My mother had no friends and no one close enough to know she hadn't been pregnant. She lived hidden by the wall my father built around her and was known as nothing more than Donald McGrath's beautiful wife. Russ and I attended Sunday school. Not being in the nave with Helen made me nervous. I didn't pay attention to our teacher and got scolded for not reciting Bible verses. At the end of the service, the minister came to pray with the children, and then he dismissed them to their parents. I was hurrying to see Helen and tried to push my way through the door, but someone caught my arm. I turned to see it was the minister holding me in place. Sweat made his dark hair cling to his red complexion. "Sweetheart, where did your mother get her baby?" "She's my baby," I answered and pulled my arm from his grip. From then on, Helen was not only my sister, she was my baby. But she was not like other babies. Helen never cried or fussed. She stayed wherever she was placed and never seemed to show any affinity. She came with us to camp every day and was my responsibility, but she didn't require much of her from her needs. Russ didn't like her. He thought she was boring and a waste of space. I loved her anything more than I knew or had, and I was scared for her. Scared that a real mom would come find her and take her from me, so I hid her during the day. To make myself feel better, I told Helen the desert was her mom, and that she had never left her real mama's arms, and never would. Neither would I. There are two sides to the High Sierras, the beauty and the fire. The Golden Mountains take on a unique beauty for every season and time of day. I never get tired of staring into the sunlit wasteland. The fires are said to be natural, but to witness one is to witness hell on earth. They blacken mountains, curl trees, and send the few creatures that find refuge in the cliffs, fleeing for their lives. The fires are God's reminder not to inhabit what is intended to be left blank. Helen grew into a beautiful girl. 12 years later, I sat on the porch and watched Helen standing on the shore of the Lake Isabella Reservoir. Her hair was the same color as the prairie, gold and sunlit, and it rose and fell with the wind. Although she was beautiful, it was seldom someone engaged her. I myself never really talked to my sister beyond necessary conversation. Her eyes avoid mine when we speak, but she doesn't show discomfort or bitterness. She's strikingly neutral in her replies and never seeks further conversation. But I do love her. The year Helen turned 12, the fires started. A serial arsonist awoke in Kern County. In the summer season, regular fires were started by backyard cookouts and discarded cigarettes. But in the year 1966, fires seemed to be catching all over the place. Some were stifled in the small hours after their birth, and others went on to destroy acres, homes, and lives. That year, Helen and I were seated at the airport diner in Kernville, waiting for my boyfriend Scott to come pick us up in his new car. They had a TV close to the cash register that always played the news. A fire had caught recently in the neighboring town of Bodfish. It had burned 8 homes and killed 12 horses. "Oh no," said Donna, the seemingly ageless owner of the airport. "Those are Ellison's quarter horses." "How terrible," I responded. Helen didn't watch the screen. She looked forward and twisted her milkshake straw between her fingers. Something new came into Helen's eyes that I had never witnessed before. The beauty had left her, and for the first time I saw the fire.
I'll tell you 2 things, and that's all you need to know. The requirements and the routine. Each job has a different set, you see. But since it's Thursday and I have to go downtown anyways, I'll tell you what you need to do a shit day. Not the best name, but fitting. First, you need a public bathroom, one where multiple people can go in at once. This bathroom needs to have a lock on the inside of the door, and it needs to have at least one stall. No cameras on the outside. The snazzier the place you're hitting, the better. And the 2 most important things to carry with you are an out-of-order sign and a plastic gun from the dollar store, painted black. Those are the requirements. This is the routine. Make sure the bathroom's empty and wait for one guy to go in. As you follow him, slap the out-of-order sign on the door and then lock it from the inside. If the guy goes for the urinal, abort. If he goes for the stall, you're in business. Now wait a second, wash your hands or something. When the guy is nice and settled, pants down and doing his business, walk up to the door, flash your fake gun under the stall for a second while saying, "Motherfucker, if you want me to shoot your sorry ass whilst you are shitting, you best slide your wallet and phone under this here stall right about now." This is the best part. He's shitting, pants down. It don't matter if he's 6'5" and a world-class kickboxer, he's not moving anywhere in a hurry. And the second best part is this. As you grab his wallet and phone and strut out of the bathroom, all he's seen is your shoes. And that's the shit hit. Now, let me be clear about the nature of the term crime when I use it. I'm not the type to go around and stab, shoot, punch, or otherwise use violence as a means to my ends. I like things that are clever, and if they aren't clever, they better be damn funny. See shit hit above. To use a simple analogy, I will not kick your door off its hinges, but I will pick the lock. That's clever. I'll also fill a keyhole with contact cement. That's damn funny. This part is about how I got started. The first time I stole was when I was 5. A small disclaimer maybe should read, the first time I remember stealing was at age 5. I was at a convenience store with my mom, and I just reached up, grabbed me some sort of coconut chocolate bar, and slipped it into my pocket. Mind you, this is also a story of the first time I got caught. The clerk, either through some form of ESP or by listening to me crinkle the wrapper in my jacket, asked my mother to empty my pockets. I was not only spanked in the store, in front of the clerk, and the look I remember on his face makes me wonder now if he wasn't some sort of sadist, but I had to pay the $2 out of my own savings, a substantial dent for a 5-year-old. The worst part of all this was that I didn't even like coconut. Now, some people might have stopped then and learned not to steal for fear of public spankings. The different thing about me is that I treated that event as a learning experience. I took some lessons away and thought to myself, how can I not get caught? The first mistake was obvious. I had a pocket at the bar without even paying attention to where the clerk was looking. I then proceeded to crinkle the wrapper, and this drew attention to myself. Lastly, I actually had the chocolate in my own pocket, a pretty obvious place to leave it. Now, here's where I know I'm different, because the solution I came up with was this. Next time, I'll get someone else to steal it for me. So, next time I was at a convenience store with my mom, I checked the clerk right away. I made sure not to act differently or draw attention. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes on the cart being pushed by my mom. And then, when I reached up and grabbed the chocolate bar this time, Turkish delight, I slipped it into my mom's pocket, under the guise of reaching up to hold her hand. We proceeded to checkout, and as soon as we got home and my mom hung her jacket up, I went and took the chocolate bar out. And damn, did I like Turkish delight. Now, I ran the pocket slip for a couple of years, until I made a large mistake and learned an equally large lesson. This was the day I moved from chocolate bars to electronics. I really wanted a pair of earbuds, you see. It didn't matter that I had no iPod or other music device. I just wanted to look like a badass walking down the street. So I slipped a pair off the shelf at Best Buy, dropped them casually into my mom's massive jacket pocket, and carried on my way. I've become very good with my hands over the last few years. We checked out, and as we walked through the door, an extremely loud alarm sounded. I froze. The security guard made me empty my pockets. Too clever for you, I thought. Then he made my mom empty her jacket. Oh, sweet baby Jesus, I thought. Remembering the sadist clerk. You got a bill for these headphones, ma'am? The guard had asked. I will in 1 second, she had said, just prior to grabbing my debit card and draining my bank account. At least there had been no public spanking. So this leads me to the card draw. I'll tell you all you need to know. The requirements and the routine. The only requirements for this are a gift card specific to the Target store with exactly $5 on it, a cell phone, and a pair of fast hands. I'm going to give you the other requirement right now, which is a knowledge of shoplifting security features. Most places use a magnetized chip somewhere on the packaging. When the clerk is ringing your item through, part of what they're doing is demagnetizing that feature when they slide the item against that gray block after scanning the barcode. If it is demagnetized, it will not set off those gate alarms at the door. This is the routine. Grab your item of choice and take it to the checkout. Ask the clerk to check the balance on your gift card. This is the hard part. As you hand her the card, you have to drop it behind where she stands. This will force them to crouch down and pick it up. At the exact moment this happens, quickly demagnetize your item while they can't see you. When they come back up and check the balance, there will only be $5, not enough for your item of choice. If it is, this part will be awkward. Offer to take the item back to the shelf, and once out of sight of staff and cameras, pocket the loot. It will not set off the alarms on your way out. If anything, they'll remember you as the polite guy who saved them the trip back to the shelf. And that's the card draw. This part is about the day I found a card that changed my life. The day started with some McDonald's. I don't order like most people would. In fact, I don't order at all. I just wait until a car pulls behind me at the drive-thru, and then I move up to the order machine. Sorry, I say. I forgot my wallet. Just going home to grab it. In case you haven't guessed, I don't go home. I just pull into the blind spot between the payment window and the pickup window. I wait until the guy behind me is ordered and paid, and then pull up to the pickup window. 9 times out of 10, the clerk just smiles and hands me the food that rightfully belongs to the sucker behind me. Back to the point. I shit-hit a guy at a nice restaurant I had never been to before. I got back to my car and leafed through the wallet. There was no cash, just a credit card and some ID. Using stolen credit cards is great if you like prison food. I'm about to chuck the wallet out the window when I feel something tucked into the back section. It was a business card for a bank manager. There was a 4-digit code written on the back. To be continued.
I'm going to start by reading a little excerpt from a story where the first line goes, "You tell me you are leaving." The story is in 10 parts, and this is part 6. For weeks, there is exercise and hunger and then junk food, plastic and crinkling. It's the end of March now. I sit on the kitchen counter with my legs uncrossed. 4:58 in the morning, I'm on the phone with Miles. There's a full moon in an hour, he tells me, which is the kind of thing we always say to each other. We say it, and sometimes it matters more than others. Can we go watch, I ask. Let's do it from the island. On the ferry, I tell him about muster stations, places on the boats where families are supposed to gather if anything bad happens. I picture bad happening. How many hands would be reaching for other hands in the last ecstasy of sinking together? We get to the island and decide to swim. There is no jumping. We run right off the dock, in an instant become submerged. I lean forward into the water and the swelling takes me to the surface. I do it again. Every time I lean forward, every time it catches. Under the full moon, Miles smiles and I do too, hard and wide. We smile from an extension of ourselves. I skip part 7. Part 8. Walking around involves too much. The way the city looks now with you here is exactly the way it will look with you gone. Being together on the last day reminds me of interlacing my fingers the awkward way, non-dominant thumb on top. I feel you more when you're absent now, the way you should be. At night, we're splayed out, face down on the floor. I lift my head so that I can rest on the other cheek, so that I cannot see you, but know you are still seeing me. This is a poem called Morse. She wrote a better poem than me that goes, H2O plus H2O equals H2O. Slowed down by a joint shared on our backs. Slowed down or less. Faded in the corners, which naturally meant there was a center. It would get close and then disappear in halves. Some black thing fluttering, but it was still us, just Morse. The next day, it was all Morgan, filling up the room with her crying, and I felt like I was too. Do you need these hands, I thought, because hands can sometimes do some of the crying for you. Hands breaks. Your voice, Tangelo, no. Orange Crush, no. Creamsicle. Sickly sweet, dripping. If I had to choose only a few words to say for the rest of my life, I would choose the ones I don't ever say out loud and still not say them. Fear that I will see you seeing the person you want to be with someone else that like this, I will get hurt by something that is not you, but your hurt and the other desire that led to it. This is happening, a smear. Am I a liar if I tell you I love you and the time it takes to utter it is longer than it is true? Do you know? I don't know, but all I want to say is I know, you wouldn't believe it. I should say it anyway. I try not to be a piece of shit, but it's impossible. I want to know if you feel these things too. Let's get closer to this thing we're already in. Find the middle of a fog and not end up on the other side. Sometimes we get there. Sometimes only kissing matters. Beer from a bottle. your lips in all its different aliases. It's a really good apology. This is how I say you're pretty. Look at the sky behind electrical lines broken by angles, an argyle pattern of relief from it, round and black, that dilating eclipse inside of you. It feels good to touch. I hold my hand up to a sunbeam and really dip my fingers in, slowly like candle wax. You know this is funneling towards some moment that is all dust. I'm right here, I'm right here, I'm right here. I can hear light when it shines. You can stay lit and in the middle, still have a dark little iris where your entire human is.
When I was 14, I spent 4 months in a juvenile correctional facility in Ontario for burning a Canadian flag. Now I know, it sounds really bad, but my intentions were strictly apolitical. In fact, as I pointed out to my judge, I was a member of the Royal Canadian Army Cadets and a proud citizen. I love the flag, the little Peggy ones they hand out at the Olympics. You remember the day we won the gold medal in Vancouver? I don't have to tell you which medal. You couldn't walk down Yonge Street that day without tripping over 1,000 little Canadian flags. That was a good day. That was a beautiful day. I love the flag. That's kind of why I set it on fire. See, I was volunteered by my RSM, who's sort of the king of the Royal Canadian Army Cadets, to teach new police officers parade drill down at the station. I thought it would be kind of fun hanging out with cops, having my own platoon and stuff, you know, being the man, but no, it went terribly. My main problem was with the flag bearer, Sergeant Scott. He was a tall guy, beefy, red-cheeked, psychologically incapable of admitting to his mistakes. You know the type. I'd say, Sergeant Scott, you need to bring your right leg to a right angle when you turn. He'd be like, I fucking did it, all right? So after a while, I got kind of tired of pissing him off. And so when he let the Canadian flag touch the pavement, I didn't draw attention to him. I just took it from his hand and called off drill for the day. Next evening, the police chief asked me in front of the police commissioner what exactly I had done with that flag, because apparently the entire police force was having trouble finding it. Well, I said, that's no surprise. Last night I took it out behind the station and set it on fire. Now, they had me in cuffs before I could explain that according to the Royal Canadian Army Cadet Green Star Handbook, which is, by the way, a nauseatingly dull read, any Canadian flag which touches the ground must be burned. It is a proper way to dispose of a dirty flag. Now, perhaps if they had hired a more interesting and colorful individual to write the Royal Canadian Army Cadet Green Star Handbook, perhaps if the Royal Canadian Army Cadet Green Star Handbook was a colorful piece of Canadian literature, then someone other than me, say the Chief of Police, would have read it and known about the proper disposal of a Canadian flag. Now, and unfortunately, this was not the case. They held me for 24 hours while they tried to charge me with defamation of a national symbol. Turns out this charge doesn't exist. Ladies and gentlemen, burning a Canadian flag in any context is completely legal. Fucking love this country. So, alas, I had pissed off the entire police force. So, technically, I was charged with destruction of police property and disorderly conduct in the eyes of the law. Now, there is only one thing that I could learn from my experience in court, which is under any circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, pay for your lawyer. My public defender spent most of her time trying to prove that Sergeant Scott was a Butterfingers, and Sergeant Butterfingers asserted under oath that he had held the flag tall and strong, at which point I may have lost my 14-year-old head and said something along the lines of, he's lying, he's under oath and he's lying, it's against the law, get him, but there was more pointing and shouting involved in this section. Now, funny phrase, contempt of court. I'm still not not sure if it means the court had contempt for me or that I showed contempt for the court, but the judge took this outburst as an example of my disorderly conduct and sentenced me to 6 months in juvie. So when I was bawling like a child all the way to juvenile hall, missing the dinner plans I had later that night, I was pretty certain that the court had contempt for me. Now, in spite of all my panic, the facility wasn't so bad. A lot like high school, but with tasers, and you weren't allowed to leave. A lot like a poorly funded inner city high school. But I even had the stereotypical, what are you in for conversation with a few other girls on my first day. This girl, Chelsea, asked me, she was like, where are you from? Now, very few people told her this in person, but Chelsea had the crooning posture and the aquiline nose of Toucan Sam. I'm not trying to be rude, it's just the way she looked. It was the first thing that came into my mind when I saw her, and she asked me, where are you from? Unionville. Yeah, that's what the table said. They all laughed in this really laugh tracks. 2.5 men kind of howl. That show is so Turns out to be cool in juvie, you have to come from a place with a tough sounding name. Scarborough, Ajax, Niagara, that sort of thing. Unionville just doesn't cut it. So Chelsea asked me, what the fuck did you do to get sent here? Well, I burned a flag. Really? Why? It touched the ground. I mean, that's the law. The flag touches the ground and you're supposed to set it on fire. So you're in here for obeying the law? No, well, technically I'm in here for destruction of police property. Well, which is it? Did you burn a flag or did you destroy police property? Both! The flag belonged to the police department! And again, the table starts mocking me and stuff, and she says, kid, I can't tell if you're a criminal mastermind or a special education candidate. And I reply, well, I can't tell if you're a girl or Toucan Sam. She did not laugh. And she's like, the fuck did you just call me? And I say, well, you know, it was a joke, like, you called me retarded, so. The word is special. Don't they teach you that in Unionville? You know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything. Well, fuck you, man. I was just trying to be friendly, but seriously, fuck you. From then on, Chelsea would knock my lunch tray out of my hands, come in my room and take things, intercept my mail, a federal offense, by the way. She kept throwing cruel nicknames my way until something stuck. Suburbia, that was me. White bread, unsalted crackers, spaghetti and no balls, me. Now, Chelsea pretty much saw to it that the only person who talked to me in juvenile hall was Jane Doe. Now, at her trial, Jane refused to state her name, and she would serve time in juvenile hall for contempt of court until she gave an officiate her legal title, an act which would have been oddly heroic if she wasn't just short of criminally insane. Another funny term, by the way. Don't trust that. All right. Jane talked like this. Little tirades like this. She said, don't trust that girl, she has red hair. Haven't you read Still Life with Woodpecker? Haven't you read Jane Urquhart? Lovely name, Jane. Redheads are crazy. Lovely name, said so. Haven't you heard of the FLQ? The IRA? The IRS? Fire in their brains makes them crazy. Bad tempers. Haven't you heard? Didn't you know? The Hungarian protester. Time Magazine's Man of the Year. 1956. The Blood on the Water. Didn't you see? Hard to tell. Black and white. But the water was orange. Said it was political. Said it was a strategy. Piss off the commies. Win the match. Gold medals. It wasn't. It was the fire and the blood and the water. Jane? You have red hair. That's not my name. These pages are giving me problems. And Jane? I have red hair. Isn't that why we're in here? Why do you hate her? Who? Who do I hate? I almost yelled, but yelling was against the rules. Toucan Sam. Shh. Don't say I said it. She looks just like him, but without the Lucky Charms. We all got it. Why did you say it? Why do you hate her? I don't hate her. I dislike her, sure, but hate? Don't lie. I saw it when you first came in. You two were born to hate each other, don't you see? No choice. Consider this. Suppose I say, Suburbia, I hate you. I hate you from the moment we've met, and I will always hate you. I don't hate you for the way you look. I don't hate you for your money. I see your soul, and I hate you for it. You could be lying in a bed rotting from the inside out, and I would be there hating you. You hate Chelsea so much, why don't you marry her? I don't hate her. Don't be coy. She's the only thing keeping you here. Poor little rich girl locked in a cage with monsters. I'm middle class. That's what I said. That's what I said. Are you retarded? Shh. Appeal. Your case would never stand up to it. Idiot. I did appeal, and in 3 months I was released with many provincial apologies. Oddly enough, I only began the process to soothe my own boredom and prove Jane wrong, but Jane was right. Jane was right about a lot of things. I had to go to Chelsea's room on my last night in juvenile hall because I had to get some of my things. She didn't say anything. The moment I came to her door, we just collapsed it was oddly glorious, our hands around each other's throats, my ruby face spitting into her tomato red cheeks. It was righteous in its ease and bloody. Confidentially, I could have released if I didn't hate her so much, and the withholding of the potential was all the more delicious. She got the upper hand and squeezed me until I was seeing stars. When she let me go, the world tilted slowly into place. To this day, I have dreams that she finished me off. I awake with the secret suspicion that these are dreams we share.
The forest fires chased us that summer. They drove us from one campsite to another, warning after warning crackling over radios everywhere we visited. We raced along the highway winding around the Ogopogo Lake. Somewhere in the depths, a serpent lay coiled in its watery nest, or so the natives said. Watch for it late into an August night, and you'll see the moonlight shining off of the humps. The lake was deceiving, they said, acted like a mirror, but concealed too much. I remembered the first time you'd come home after fishing. You laid the fish down on the kitchen counter gently. You wanted to pay it some respect after taking its life. It was a good catch. I knew you were proud because you tried so hard to hide it. Corners of your mouth curled down. Could tell you felt guilty too. That was less obvious. Behind us, the monstrous hood of the mountain was violet in the sunset. We couldn't seem to free our little red station wagon from its silhouette. Saw the helicopters buzzing like flies, dipping their tarpaulin catchers into the lake, surrendering white blurs of falling water to the flames. We stopped for roadside pies as the car made its way from town to town. Locals staking it out until the last moment. Cherry and peach and strawberry we had, warmed in the sunshine. Most places were evacuated by the time we passed through, not a car to be found in the streets. Rooms behind lowered blinds and drawn curtains sitting still and useless. It was the silence, yes, the silence, that unnerved me most. I couldn't put my mind at ease in such quiet. Gave me the same feeling I had swimming the Stragmore Bog at summer camp, watching my submerged white legs suspended above the darkness, tips of my toes saved by the last fingers of sunlight reaching down. We kept on southward, past a dilapidated red barn pouring forth the chaos of bats for the night sky to feed. Sometimes it looked like we were driving straight into the fire, echoing in my mind all the while Frost's chant. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. The air was cleansed with the incense of burning trees, smoke as fine as the inside of a seashell. I understood then the heaviness of the word decay, why it took so long to leave the tongue, how the rest of the world would always hurry. We stopped only once, at the stiff curlicue of a doe. I imagined it as an embryo buried deep in nourishing layers, building itself like a grain of sand folded into a clam's mantle. The symmetry of a circle caught me by surprise, perfect in its existence there, at the base of a ponderosa pine. Took me a while to realize that strange excitement I felt was fear. Knew the insides of the burning trees were boiling with sap under the flames. I'd found a piece of amber on the last hike, a clod of tree blood shed upon the ground. Had held it up to the sky and seen the splayed beetle preserved within. Those same rays of sunshine now fed the wind and dried the earth, giving birth to the fire. And the aftermath promised its own kind of macabre beauty. The great cathedral of firs, now a graveyard of blackened stumps, ground littered with tiny white bones, wind no longer pulsing with the bite of fresh pine, acrid. I said, let's turn around. Let's turn around, go back to the lake. We'll park on the shore, unleash the canoe from the rooftop. We'll row through the shallows to the berry center, feel the paddles pulling heavily through water lily roots, like fingers in a mass of knotted hair. Let the waves from our boat ripple to the shore, praise the hot cheek of the ground for us. Let's not run, you and I. We'll watch the mountain burn.
Near a spring, in first love's prime, we built our hope on Vardy's shore, dug the hole by hand down to bedrock, limestone, keeping the copse intact. With pickaxe, shovel, wheelbarrow, clearing space, blessing the crags, swept with brooms, adding mortar to our concrete blocks, 4 by 8 foot wall, then 2 by 8 foot window, 10 of each interspersed when finished. By day, Stonehenge amid the trees. By night, a spaceship. Light through cedars, the bullfrog's swamp chorus gazing in wonder, a hippie home off the grid. No Canadian shield protecting our hearts. We made wild love in sun-warmed fields, on hot stone. Forever this, forever bliss, pulsing skin, taut and steaming joy. Maritime girl and British boy, organic. Brands hold earth catalog, our guide. Growing our garden shared with rabbit and gopher alike, inviting artistic and politico friends to potluck feasts, to dance at the solstice dawn, take naked dips, canoe through the marsh, fish pike if inclined, box Brandenburg ecstasy through 12 volts, glistening across the air, warming near the Ingle, recharging it all on Sundays. Earning our keep in Kingston, commuting hydrocarbons daily, past stone mills into the basin where the river meets the lake, seeking science plus philosophical truth at Queen's. We grew together. Playing out parental fantasies, too, unknown to us, this particular family pattern, until later. Evaporation of the spring, insidious somehow. After a time, the passion left. Buried under academic toils, perhaps, or gone with the tightness of fulfilling someone else's dream, or lost in the seduction of a drunken night's fling. Generational myths revealed, no one willing to forgive. So the second one is a sonnet, and it's called Electron, and electron is the Greek word for amber. As pitch from Baltic pines and oil combined with air, to spark electrons charged through time, creating gems not known when rosins flowed, preserving force beyond extinction's hold. So we, mid-aged, share love from each to each. Our children, born of other loves to teach, beyond our waltzing on blue earth entwined of steadfast joy, enduring as the wind. Romancing through eternity, we glow in all our generation's forward flow of stories, sweet as passion's dance that lives when we've returned to dust. Our bond still gives a beauty we can't name, as amber found reminds us of our graceful earth's rebound. Thank you.
I'm Charlie from just around at the Kansas City Night Jam playing sax with Papa Joe Jones drumming. Playing that sound and then those sounds and too many sounds, all of them at once. I think everything's good till that cymbal sailing on waves of smoke cannonballs to the band deck. Too many of my sounds ruining their jam. Was it a hack? Asking myself, would I wear it or would I leave it? I unthought it all. Unthinking the sweat on my face and the sax I coiled my hands around. Unthinking it all in 1935. I took the sax out of my mouth and looked at the bloodstains on the bandstand. Playing it hard had cut my hands. The band crew laughed and started sniffing at my sap song as I bolted on my new hat to cover my face, going off stage like I was walking the plank to piranhas. My stupid sounds at the Joe Jones Jam sounded off key without the sound I kept hearing, touching what I could hear and just short of playing it. But I'd be all right, you can be sure of that. A bird was vibrating inside, waiting for years to come out. It's stuck in there, and I'm looking for that thing that I need, that thing music needs, sound. Thinking to myself, don't know why I'm feeling so sad, longing to try something I never had. Unthinking it all in the practice woodshed with my sax in 1935, looking for that thing I keep hearing but have never heard. And not long after, a few years later in 1939, I got the best Christmas. I got the best you could ask for. Verily played, verily blew, verily a downbeat, oh you. I stayed back at the Three Deuces on 52nd Street for an after-hour jam. I came alive. For the first time I heard something outside it all, high up there with everything and all. I flew. I heard things clear as a crystal waterfall, all the sounds in the world without stupidity. Heard them all, I heard them all, and then that sound. But you can't ask what it is. Sit and take a listen. The pianist plays, the singer sings. Plenty of time to hear it all in my head. My neck beats and the sax sways up, down, to the side. Inside then outside of music. Backed in piano chords and substitutes. That sound I liked hearing but never heard. A shrill screech came out my sax as I swung, and its keys and pads were wet from hours of playing. Sound just floating, bebopping all over with pyrotechnic agility and triplet pickups in 4/4. I came alive. The sound was high over the rest. I flew with it in and out of time, setting the beat where I saw it. But then the singer's stepping from it, telling me, Charlie Parker, don't you be playing that shit behind me. I needed jazz clean and pretty. I played in the horn, and that best gift, that hummingbird sucking nectar, came out after so long. I heard that thing musicians were sniffing for, tipping my hat to Papa Jones and the crew. And then it all moved way out, my sound. Felt it start and flutter off the ship overseas. Felt that Liberty Island breeze and heard her say, take fire and fling the rags off those bird wings.
Neil was lying on his futon, covers kicked off to one side, socks dangling from his toes. It was a few hours past midnight. The window was wide open, but the curtains lay flat and still. Bugs made noises at one another just beyond the screen, arguing. The air in the room clung to his skin, pushing down on him with sweaty palms. He heard footsteps on the stairs. She went, stopping and starting. Neil held himself very still. The footsteps got louder as they came closer to his bedroom. He wondered where she'd chosen. His mother had always been fond of San Diego, although she hated the heat of this summer, had spent most of it within the 10-meter radius of the electrical fan in the living room, drinking homemade lemon iced tea and reading paperbacks. She could be headed north. She reached the bottom of the stairs. Neil heard her set her bag down beside her. It must have been the old leather one her mother had given her. He tried to picture the contents of the suitcase, her blue dress, the worn copy of The Secret Garden, the bracelet his father had given her, and her passport. Neil rolled onto his back. He wished ardently for a ceiling fan. The front door creaked. She should have oiled the hinges. Next, he heard her open and close the trunk of the car, the red sedan. You should have got the muffler looked at, he would have told her. He would have known to do things like that. She stepped on the gas pedal. The headlights shone through his curtains. Neil got up and walked outside to the front porch. Humidity was palpable. He sat on the porch steps and watched as his mother drove away, staring at the red of her receding brake lights, as if making eye contact. When Neil got up, his father was standing at the window. He was looking outside, but not at anything in particular. His face was freshly shaved, but his lips were chapped. His posture seemed better than usual. Neil passed him and walked into the kitchen. On the table was a cup of black coffee. He bent over and pulled a frying pan out of the cupboard. He turned on the stove element and scooped some margarine onto the pan. He tapped the eggs on the edge of the kitchen counter, opening them, egg whites spilling over his fingers. He made 4 fried eggs, poking the yolks with his spatula until they broke. The sizzling of the eggs reminded him of the sound of cicadas. Neil thought about how he always heard cicadas, but he never saw them. He put 2 eggs on each plate and then put them down at opposite ends of the table. Neil's dad came into the kitchen. "Thank you," he said to Neil. He was wearing a white button-up shirt and black slacks. Neil looked up. Neil was wearing only a pair of plaid boxer shorts. "Did your mother go out to get the newspaper?" asked Neil's dad. His cup of coffee had long since stopped steaming. He picked up the mug and held it. He didn't look at Neil as he spoke. "I don't think so." "Oh, where did she go?" "I don't know," said Neil. "I didn't ask." It was difficult riding a bike with a butterfly net and a mason jar, and a couple of times Neil almost dropped one, or both, on his way to the forest. Neil dismounted and propped his bicycle against a tree. There was a dirt trail leading into the forest, and Neil ambled along it. Eventually, Neil wandered off the trail. He walked further and further into the trees. Occasionally, he would rest a hand on one of their trunks. He could hear insects and birds in the forest. He saw a blackbird and a bunch of mayflies, but no cicadas. He also saw a stream of tadpoles swimming near the rocks. He took off his shoes and stood in the middle of the stream for a few minutes, causing tadpoles to flee. His feet were cool, but the rest of his body revolted against the heat. The sun started to get lower in the sky, but still no cicadas. Neil was just starting to think he would quit when he found one, big as his fist, sitting on a tree trunk. It seemed larger than Neil had conceived cicadas to be. Neil whipped down the net around the cicada. It sat motionless, not caring about Neil or his net. With a quick sweeping motion, Neil pushed the cicada off the tree. Neil reached his hand inside the net and pulled it out. He did this carefully, but the bug seemed too sturdy for him to harm unintentionally. The cicada was still not moving much. It seemed alive, but full of ennui. Neil unscrewed the top of the mason jar, one-handed with some struggling, and deposited the cicada inside. He paused, staring at the bug in the jar, and then bent over, picking up a few leaves and twigs, placing them in. Neil wasn't sure what a cicada might do with some leaves and twigs, but it seemed like the proper thing to do. He began to walk back in the direction he thought he had come in, looking for the stream he had stood in. He held the jarred cicada out in front of him. "My mother left last night," Neil told the cicada. "My dad hasn't realized it yet, I don't think. He will soon, though. She's left before, twice. Once she disappeared for 2 months, and the other time it was about 6 months. She just walked back in the door. My dad likes her a lot. I'm okay when she leaves, after the first time, but it's him I worry about. He just shuts down. He's a pretty quiet man as it is, but when she's gone, he's dead silent." Neil came to the stream he'd seen before and headed left. "I imagine she just goes to places she likes, and you can't talk to her about it. You have to pretend she never left, or she'll do the same shutdown that Dad does." Neil walked out of the forest. His bike was still against the tree. "It's okay. I cook, I clean, I do my laundry and Dad's laundry. I'm self-sufficient, and I know she'll be back. She'll just walk back in the door." Neil sighed. He looked up for the moon, but it was somewhere he couldn't see. Finally, it was just a little bit cooler. He tucked the butterfly net in his armpit and picked up the bicycle with one hand. His hands trembled slightly. He got onto the bicycle and then scraped the back of his heel on the metal teeth of the pedal. Neil winced and rode to the side of the asphalt. He stopped to wait for a car to go by. As he got ready to cross the road, the jar fell out of Neil's hand and shattered. The cicada, in a fit of pique, shook off the shards of glass with its wings and flew away. As it flew, it made a noise that Neil could only describe as the sound of the sky meeting the highway at the horizon in the middle of August.
Dallas remembers the first time he got into a street fight. It was near the corner of Ord and McCall in a park with a bench and a few short trees. The air was thin that night and there was ice on the salted streets and sidewalks. He rubbed his bare hands together and pulled his hat down low, his jacket tight, and his scarf up. It was just a short walk, and then he could go home. Dallas heard the howls of laughter from a bar on the corner of Dundas and McCall. He didn't stop at the intersection, but ran straight across it. A car horn blared behind him, air puffed out of his mouth, and he pulled his scarf up again and shoved his hands deep in his pockets. The rough leather of his wallet rubbed up against his cracking skin. The street was crooked and narrow past the gallery. People were shadow silhouettes in the side streets. He broke out into the light. The homeless were scattered on the sides of Queen West. There was a guy in the corner, he remembers, leaning against a plain all-glass store to beat. Every time Dallas sees him, he has a sign and a cigarette hanging loosely from his lips. Dallas never reads the signs. He passes by. He imagines himself in the same place, just him. He wonders what he might write on his sign. The shops were mismatched in size, and dull gray closed signs were rare, even at that hour. The Pizza sign was a fluorescent orange. Through the window, he saw a few patrons standing, leaned against tables or friends. He pushed open the door and walked inside, pulled off his hat and ruffled his hair. A teenager was slumped over the counter with an orange and white visor pulled down low across his sweaty bangs. In the rotating glass, the lonely pepperoni slices were dry and stale. "Can I help you?" "Just pepperoni, thanks," Dallas said, eyes following the spinning slices. The teen handed him his pizza, pushed into a triangle box and burned near the edges. When he walked over to a table, the teenager sighed audibly and started to loudly restock utensils. "Sorry, am I bothering you?" Dallas asked, halfway between sitting and standing. The teen mumbled something without looking up from his task. "Am I bothering you?" Dallas asked again. The other patrons quieted, and in the silence the shop filled with the sound of cars speeding over slush. "No, man, I'm good," the teen finally replied. Dallas sank slowly into his seat. In 25 minutes, Dallas would have a pair of gloved knuckles hurtling towards his face. The dinging sound of the bell echoed behind him as he left the store. He picked up his pace. The cold was more biting now. A crack opened up along his palm, and the blood on it lay dry and still. 15 now. He walked past the homeless guy at the corner and into the darkness of McCall. He could hear the humming of the streetcar behind him and see the flickering lights in his periphery. Some of the single silhouettes had blended into distinct groups that moved together. Dallas paused at Dundas and twisted his head from left to right. The orange hand that faced him was solid. He ran across the street. The angry red of brake lights flashed like cameras. Car horns went off. Adrenaline rushed through his body, and his hat flew off his head. He looked back at the road from the other side of the street and saw the neon green of his hat being run over and dirtied by the cars. He ran back into the road and swiped the dirty toque off the asphalt, stuffing his sullied hat into his jeans pocket. 8 minutes. He brushed against students walking up to the university. They moved by swiftly, clicking boot heels and crunching sneakers. Dallas hunched his shoulders away from them and crossed to the other side of the street. The air was colder there without the warmth of people walking on all sides of him. He pushed down a shiver and buried his hands in his pockets. The dirty melted snow from his hat squished between his fingers. 5 minutes. He walked into the park. It was just before the corner of Ord and McCall. There was a group of guys, maybe his age, convening near one of the short trees. Dallas sat down on the bench facing them. 3. "So then I told her, you can stay or go, I don't give a shit. Don't sit around in my place and tell me what to do, all right? So then she picks up and leaves, and all her crap is at my place now." Dallas laughed, but the group didn't notice. He laughed louder, a before sound expanded and seeped into the trees. "Hey buddy, you okay there?" 2. The group turned towards him and started to walk over. There was a single light by the bench. It was an emergency post. The red glowing light of the panic button illuminated the group. The speaker came close to Dallas and squinted at him. "I'm just thinking, that's fucked up, man. What a bitch," Dallas said. The guy didn't respond. He raised an eyebrow at his buddies, who shrugged in turn. "Guess we all take what we can get, eh?" Dallas said, while his lips slowly turned upwards. "Especially if we haven't got a lot to work with in the first place." 1. The guy scoffed and his friends nudged him forward. He knocked their hands off his shoulders and turned away, a quick whatever slipped through his lips. Dallas rose from the bench and his feet slid on the frozen grass as he ran forward. He thrust out his hand and knocked the guy in the back of the head. 0. A gloved fist ripped itself from the pack and dug into the side of Dallas's face. He fell on the grass and laid there. His breath rushed out in pants, and his fingers felt twisted from the awkwardness of his punch. More cracks opened up against his palm, and he squeezed his fist shut until he could feel the warm blood pushing against his fingers. Dallas remembers the first time he got into a street fight. He feels something and thinks it might be excitement. Thank you.
In the middle of winter, after dinner, Poppy takes me out onto the ice. "There's no moon tonight," says Poppy, "a perfect night to look at the stars." I ask if I can bring Rudy, and Poppy says yes. It's very cold out tonight, so I make sure Rudy is wearing his scarf. I'm only wearing my pajamas under my snowsuit, but Poppy makes me put on my woolly socks under my boots. I get to carry the lantern because going down the stairs in the dark is scarier for me than him. We walk straight off the dock onto the ice. Poppy steps down really carefully, but I don't have to. It's not very slippery because of the bits of snow on top. We saw Fergal ice fishing this morning, and he showed us how thick the ice was around the hole he'd sawed, and it was as thick as my whole arm. Poppy said maybe we could go skating next weekend, and I said yes. It's funny how in the summer, when there's no moon, it's so dark, but the snow and the ice light everything up tonight. Poppy says, "The ice crystals in the snow are really good at reflecting light, eh?" I pick up a handful of snow as we crunch away on the ice, looking to see if 2 snowflakes are the same. "Yup, it's pretty light out here in the dark," I say. Poppy laughs. When we reach something like the middle of the lake, we lie down on our backs in the snow on the ice. I wriggle to get comfortable. I wish the snow was deep enough to make a snow angel. You know, loggers used to load sleighs with trees and get horses to pull them across the lakes in the winter, Poppy says. The trees back then were so big that 2 people couldn't touch hands around their trunks. I already knew that. They told us at my school trip to Crawford Lake, where a horse fell through the ice a long time ago, but it didn't get eaten by fish and its eyes were still in, under all the water. But I don't tell Poppy about that. We just look at the stars. "Where's the Big Dipper, bud?" "There," I point. "And the Little Dipper?" he asks. When all the stars are out, everything looks like the Little Dipper. It's so hard to find. Every time he shows me, I measure how far away from the Big Dipper it is with my fingers, but I always forget how far away it should be by the next time, and which way it points. I think that if I was a great explorer, I would need to know how to find the Little Dipper so that I could find my way with the North Star. "See those 3 in a line?" Poppy asks. "Those?" "Yes." "Orion's Belt," I say. "Hey, good memory." "What about that one, Poppy?" "Cassiopeia. Remember her story?" "Yup," I say. Andromeda got saved by Perseus at the end. I think you'll grow up to tell great stories, bud." I imagine myself an old man, just like Poppy with my grandson out on the lake, telling him these stories. I imagine him having his own Rudy in a scarf. My snowsuit feels crinkly with cold against the ice, and it swishes when I move. "The baby is somewhere up there," says Poppy. "I don't think she's in the sky. I saw the pictures of her in Mom's belly. She still had a tail. I think she's in the ground. But I don't say anything. I don't want to make Poppy sad." Poppy just passes me the binoculars. We look at the stars quietly for a bit. "My butt is cold," I say. "Let's go in then," Poppy says. He takes a long time to stand up. I brush the snow off his back and we head for shore. We don't even light the lamp to find our way back up the stairs because the snow is so bright. We try our best to be quiet when we get back inside. My boots make loud clomping noises as I shake them off. Poppy sends me to brush my teeth while he puts away some dishes. I can hear my dad snoring in his room, but I think my mom is still awake. I poke my head in through the door. She looks small, covered by the big duvet, but she must be warm in it. Good night, sweetie, she says. Good night, Mom, I say back.